Well, hello everybody. Welcome to episode 005 of CodeWhile. If you scan this QR code at the top right of the page that you see here, you'll reach this same web page where all of this code is available. In this episode, I decided to extend some of the code from episode 003. In that episode, a JSON.stringify implementation was established. And I thought maybe it could be extended. So I extended that code. While that code was already operational, it produced JSON. There's a sort of a de facto behavior that is commonly found in browsers today for the JSON.stringify function. And I thought I could get a little closer to that by approaching the same behavior. So what have I got here? I've got a diff that I've put in here, and we can explore it down here. There's a new function called _indent, and it takes two arguments, more and state. It's got three variables, indentation, levels, and unit. Unit is set to state.indentation unit, which we haven't seen yet, so you don't know what that is. If the unit is empty, I'm going to return early with an empty string from this indent function. Otherwise, I'll take a shortcut here and store state.indentation levels, which you also haven't seen yet, to the levels variable. And then I check if the user has specified the more argument as true or false. It's a Boolean argument. If more is specified, what I'll do is I'll set the indentation to be a previous indentation that's on this levels array as the last element. Levels.length -1 means the index of the last element in the levels array. And then I'll add a unit. What this is doing is it's building up a string of indentation, of spaces for indentation. And then assigning that to indentation. And then also pushing that new level of indentation onto this array called levels. If the user hasn't specified more, then we'll try to unwind a little bit. And I'll take levels, I'll pop off the current level of indentation, and then I'll set this indentation variable to the previous level of indentation, the last element that's in the array after popping it. And I'll return that indentation here. So down here in the stringify function, there are two new arguments. Now, the commonly found JSON stringify function has a replacer function as the second argument. I'm not going to support that in this episode here, so I've called it ignored, and then I've got some error checking for it. If somebody tries to specify it, what will happen is I check the type of ignored, and if it's not undefined, and if ignored is not equal to null, then I'll throw an error saying that the second argument must be undefined or null. And this will be compatible with the previous behavior. So any code that anybody might be using that just uses stringify with the single JSON_candidate variable, they won't get a surprise from this. And what else have we got? This is the indentation. Now, the commonly found JSON.stringify accepts a custom string or a number that specifies the number of spaces. In this implementation, I'm only going to accept a number of spaces. I'm not going to accept a direct string. So the first thing I do is I check the type of indentation. If it's undefined, such as if somebody's using the previous implementation that didn't have an indentation, and so they would call it with just the single argument, and indentation would be undefined. If the type is undefined, I set a default value for it of 0. Then the next thing I do is I do some checking for the value and the type of that indentation argument. I want it to be a number. I want it to be a finite number, not NaN, not a number, or negative or positive infinity. I want it to be greater than or equal to 0, and I want it to be an integer. So if we divide by 1 and there's anything left over, that's not an integer. If any of those criteria aren't met, I'll throw an error stating that indentation must be a positive integer. Then I start out by building assigning an empty string to this indentation underscore unit variable. And then here's one way to build a string, and that's to iterate over the specified desired number of spaces and add a space to that string. Now, old web browsers might not have the string prototype repeat function. And so that's why I'm building it up this way, because repeat isn't available in every JavaScript implementation. And then another diff here is I removed this state creation here and I spread it out a little bit more down here. Now it's got a couple of extra properties. So it's still got the empty ancestors array, but now it's also got indentation levels as an array with a single element that is an empty string. And it's also got indentation unit, which is the string that was just built up just here. So this will be if the user specifies indentation of 2, then they'll get a string with 2 spaces in it as the indentation unit. And that's all the diffs for that function. Here in stringify array, I've added a new variable indentation, and right near the other recursion tracking logic that's here, state.ancestors.push with the object of interest, an array in this case. Near that, indentation should also correspond to recursion. So I'm using that new underscore.indent function, specifying give me more indentation by using a true value here and passing it along the state and taking the result of that function call and assigning that to indentation. Down here, the behavior is changed a little bit for the JSONs that get pushed into the JSON array. Now I'm adding indentation before the JSON. And that indentation might be empty. If the user hasn't specified that they desire any indentation, that'll just be an empty string and it'll yield the same kind of result that the previous code did. After doing that, I remove the new indentation by specifying false for the more argument, and the result of that will be the previous level of indentation. I assign that to indentation now. And down here, I do a new check. I check if the indentation unit is not empty. If it's not empty, that means that the user desires indentation. And if the JSON's array has any elements whatsoever, if its length is greater than 0, then I'm not going to use the old behavior. I'm going to use a new behavior. In this case, it'll be almost the same. It still starts and ends with a square bracket, but now it's going to have a new line after the left square bracket, and it's also going to have a new line after the comma that joins each element. And then after all of those, it's also going to have a new line, and then the previous level of indentation, and then finally the closing square bracket. Now down here in stringify object, it's all counterparts to what we just explored there. Indentation variable, we'll push the new indentation level and build it. But down here it's a little more complicated. In members.push, or in this line that has members.push, now I'm putting indentation before the stringification of the key or the property name, but there's even another little bit here. It seems to be the case that the behavior commonly found in stringify uses a space after a colon if the user has specified a desire for any indentation. So I'm going to mimic that same behavior here. What I do here is I use the ternary conditional operator to check state.indentation unit is not equal to an empty string. If it's not equal to an empty string, that means the user wants spacing. So if it's not equal to an empty string, I return a little space here after the colon. And if they haven't specified a desire for spacing, I return an empty string right there. And then the old stringification of the value of that property. Pardon me. And then again, popping off the indentation using the old indentation. And this is a comparable flow to what was just explored in the previous function here. And that's to have a new line after the left curly brace, after the comma, and another new line, and then the previous indentation, and then finally the right curly brace. So that's the diff in that section. Here's the whole function, including the new changes down here. I'll scroll past that. And all those nice replacements. And that gave me an object. Down here I've pasted in some sample JSON. And you can see it here. And then I used this not quite JSON, this new implementation, to attempt to parse that JSON test and produce an object out of it. And that's what I got. I got an object. And now I've used the not quite JSON.stringify. I've specified that test object, JSON parse test. I specified null as the second argument. And then I've specified a desire for 2 spaces. And what do we get from that? Well, this is what we get. Okay, no indentation at the beginning. That's nice. And then indentation before these properties. And this empty array doesn't have any elements, so it's all collapsed onto a single line so as to be compact. Same with this object here. And then down here we finally get a little bit of recursion. Here, nested array is an array, and its first element is an object that goes down to here. And then this closes the array. Does that line up? Yeah, that lines up here. Okay, that's nice. Yeah, everything looks pretty good here. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope to see you again in the next Code While. Take care, everybody.